Okay, everyone who's here and those who are gradually coming in, welcome to this month's meeting of the Nashville Microsoft Azure User Group. I know we expect to have a lot of new members tonight, so we have a brief presentation that just talks about the group, and I will try to make it brief so we can get to our presenter. Okay, we're going to have, like I said, we're going to have a very brief agenda. We'll go through all of this information. I'm not going to read the agenda to you. I could really shorten our group mission with one sentence that says we're all about Azure, everything Azure. But we try to mix things up. We try to have topics that are of interest to developers, to infrastructure people, to management, from all levels. And really, we're open to almost any suggestion that anyone has about a topic that you might want us to have in the future. Founded in 2013 with 4 members. Now today, it still blows my mind to realize that we have over 2,000 registered members in Meetup. So we're still growing, but that doesn't mean we couldn't use more. So tell your friends, tell your coworkers, come join the group, come join us. Currently, we're meeting only virtually. We hope to change that next month, by the way, in June. But so far, we're only meeting virtually. We meet every third Thursday of the month. With this give this little overview, and then our main topic about 5 minutes past. In non-pandemic times, we have been meeting up at Microsoft in Nashville. We may resume our meetings at Microsoft in Nashville, or we may be meeting at Vaco. We haven't decided exactly where we're going to meet. Again, the last line is important. Let us know what topics you'd like to see in the future that you'd like us to cover. This is the still more people waiting. Okay, hang on, let me. Let him in. Okay. Well, I'm the co-founder, and I'm one of the group founders and the president of the group. By day, I just excuse me, I made an announcement today, this week, that I've joined a new company. I now work for Enterprise, for Insight Enterprises in their platform and DevOps group as an Azure architect. So I've joined them. Roger Dahlman is a co-founder. He's been with us from the beginning, and he's vice president of the group. By day, Roger is an enterprise architect at Deloitte here in Nashville. Tim has a new title. Tim, I think I got your title right, did
I? That'll work.
Okay. Tim now carries a blue badge and works for Microsoft after a long career as a board member, an MVP, a Pluralsight course developer, an author, and you can reach him at techtrainertim.com if you want to get in touch with him. Okay. Akila Alred is our director of academic outreach. She works with the colleges and universities in the area. We like to attract students who want to learn about Azure, so she works on that. Matt Puckett is a Microsoft Principal National Cloud Solution Architect. It's a big, long title. He's been with us from the beginning as our meeting space sponsor. When you meet at Microsoft, you have to have a sponsor from Microsoft. So he's been our sponsor since the beginning. And Jack Hagler is our refreshment sponsor. He's been our refreshment sponsor for 7 years. When I used to run user groups in New York, I used to always be scrounging around for companies to pay for pizza. So fortunately, with Jack and Vaco, we haven't had to do that. And Jack is the Vaco director of recruiting. Okay. We do have sponsors. We have some permanent sponsors. Microsoft, in addition to giving us meeting space when we meet there, they pay for our meetup dues. Excuse me. I used to have to pay for the meetup dues out of my own pocket, so it's really a pleasure to have someone like Microsoft sponsoring and paying for those dues. Vaco, as I indicated, when we meet on site, they provide refreshments. So to support us in our remote meetings, they've provided the Zoom subscription that we're using. And Insight Enterprises does give me some time to run my group. At least they will once they find out what I do, okay? We're also sponsored, we're also sponsored by the Greater Nashville Technology Council. We have a committee made up of all the user group leaders all the technology group leaders rather, in the Nashville area, and I'm the chairman of that committee. So we're going to be having events that all user groups and technology groups will get involved in as time goes on. I know we haven't done a lot because of the pandemic, but we will be doing some, some things in that area. Sponsorship opportunities, again, we're open to companies that want to take advantage of this. If you want to have 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning of a meeting in exchange for giving something away. Could be gift certificates, could be products. But one thing we can't do is we can't accept cash, because for the last 13 years, the last 8 years rather, we haven't had a bank account, and we don't want to have one now. So, but we do have the ability to give stuff away. If your company's interested, contact Roger Dahlman. He's the sponsorship director of the group. Okay. And we're always looking for presenters. We do have a presenter, we believe, lined up for next month, but we could always use more presenters. We have a YouTube channel. This meeting will be posted on the YouTube channel within a day or two after the end of the meeting. But there's also a lot of good, there's a couple of presentations out there from Tim. There's a couple that I've done, there's some good information out there that you can go back and take a look at. And with tonight's meeting is going to be all about cloud certifications. And I'm going to turn the floor over to Tim. So Tim, you want to take it away?
Sure, Bill, thanks a lot. Would you stop your screen share? Okay, there you go. Let me select the screen.
Sure.
All righty, well, let's do this thing. And Bill, if you wouldn't mind doing the admit button, because I don't know if I can multitask to that degree of depth at this hour where I am here in Nashville. Okay, so thank you. Thanks for coming to this presentation. I've got about an hour's worth of material, but it doesn't have to go that long. I'm also here, and from my perspective, even more importantly than walking you through this material, I want to answer any questions that you have. I'll give you very candid replies that come directly from my experience. This is a Microsoft certification jumpstart. So some goals that I have for us, let's bring it out here, is to spend just the first couple minutes understanding the role of IT certification. Historically, I've been in the industry, I think close to a couple dozen years now. Historically, I've found that IT certifications are a polarizing topic. There are those whose careers have been founded in part or in whole on certs. Mine actually falls into that category. And others who've avoided certs and are really antagonistic against them. We're just going to take a look as objectively as possible. How could a cert help you, period? And then once you've decided you want to move ahead with Microsoft certs, what does the landscape look like today? What's been the trend over years and time, but most particularly what's going on right now and in the future? I'll help you choose your first or next Microsoft certification. And then very importantly, once you've isolated what your first or next cert is, how do you best maximize your investment of time and effort? Because these things aren't cheap. In US dollars, most of these Microsoft exams cost $165 US dollars per attempt. And I suspect part of the reason why these IT certs are priced at a premium level is to make you kind of have to work for them, because you have some incentive there for sure. And then lastly, what happens after your exam? So that's how I've structured it. Should work pretty well. Session materials are just the slide deck. If you are interested in this slide deck, you're more than welcome to it. I created a PDF, and you can point your browser to timw.info/CSS22. That stands for Certification Study Skills 2022. And that'll be a direct download of the PDF of this slide deck. Might be beneficial for you. I'll also show this URL at the end of the deck if you miss it the first time around. So understanding the role of IT certification and answering the question, why do you care? Why do you get certified to begin with this stuff? Well, I've got some good arguments, I think. I'm interested to know what you think of them. One would be differentiating yourself in a crowded job market. I know that today, post-pandemic, it seems like there's kind of the opposite problem, where businesses are scrambling to find good talent. But nonetheless, if it comes down to you and another candidate, if you're certed and they're not, all else being equal, anything you can do to differentiate yourself seems to me wise. Next, bolstering your next performance review or job interview. Certs are a good way to demonstrate a commitment to continuing education. Something like cloud computing and Microsoft Azure in particular, you pretty much have to be an eternal student or you're going to be left behind for sure. You may not have a choice to get certified. That's pretty easy. Why get certified? Because my job is telling me I have to. You may have a requirement, government contracting. If you work for a Microsoft partner, end of story, you're just going to go to the next step. If you're working as a consultant, you want to do everything you can to bolster your source credibility. Certification, yet another method for that. And lastly, this is important, a portable skill set that you can take from position to position. This is particularly beneficial, well, it's particularly advantageous if you're working for a company that believes in education and is willing to sponsor your certification, because that way you don't have to spend the $165 per exam. And you'll take the cert with you to your next role. It's not bound to a particular position, okay? So those are some business cases. Now, a little bit of history. If you've been in the IT industry or you've been a Microsoft specialist for a while, at one time, at the beginning of my career in the mid to late 90s, for instance, the gold standard Microsoft certification was the MCSE. Originally, it stood for Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer. Then it became later in time Solutions Expert. But MCSE definitely does have a long history. Those initials definitely boosted my career when I earned my MCSE and Windows NT4. The thing about these old Microsoft certifications is that they're all monolithic. They weren't so much focused on job roles, they were focused on Microsoft products and technologies. Now, none of these are available anymore, but I still have them on my Microsoft Certified Professional transcript. And it's kind of funny to look back at Network Essentials and TCP/IP and all that good stuff. Nowadays, we don't have as much need for what you're seeing on the slide right now, a product-based cert that you get sent by Microsoft and put it in a frame and look at it on the wall and be like, yeah, all right. Now Microsoft uses these digital credentials, these digital badges that are much easier to share. And frankly, it's a lot more validation of your achievement, because I suppose if I were a really dishonest person, I could try to manufacture one of these printed certs and then go to my job interview and go about it that way. That's not the case with these new digital credentials, because they work in a sense like TLS or SSL certificates. They're verified by not only Microsoft, the vendor, but also a company called Credly. That's the digital badge provider that Microsoft partnered with, okay? So what we have here nowadays in 2022 in the Microsoft certification portfolio are job role instead of product-based certifications. And almost all of them are focused on the Microsoft Cloud Platform. Now, that shouldn't pose an issue here tonight because we're in the Microsoft Azure users group, but I know that there's been quite a bit of pushback by people whose businesses are not in the cloud yet and maybe never will be. Systems administrators who have been Microsoft specialists in a while and want to continue to validate on, say, Windows Server, SQL Server, those kinds of products. That definitely has been a pain point, because Microsoft explicitly has targeted these job roles primarily for the cloud. Now there are some exceptions. There's a database administrator certification that touches local SQL Server as well as Azure SQL. There's a Windows Server Hybrid Administrator credential that certifies you on Active Directory domain services on premises, as well as Azure Active Directory. So the ground is evolving. Microsoft does listen to its customers. Here's a screenshot that shows one of those digital credentials. That's an old screenshot. When you share your credential nowadays, you can share a public link to a URL that will say, you earned this cert on such and so a day, here are the relevant skills, and there's a validation that can take place there as well. So I think it's a good thing that we've got these digital badges for sure. Another aspect of these digital badges is that they're eminently shareable. You know, there's even a gamification aspect. At least I am suckered in by gamification, having been a video gamer since before, almost as soon as I could walk, essentially. in terms of I want to add more badges to my shelf, so to speak, you know, and sharing on social media, adding to your resume or CV, putting them on your website, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Make sense so far? Okay. Now I'm trying to see here if I can get to the chat window, just in case any chats happen. Bill, if you wouldn't mind, if there's any questions that surface in the chat, would you please stop me in my tracks so I can address the question?
Will do.
Okay. Thanks. So now let's review the Microsoft certification program. I'm going to do some demos too. This is a bit uncharacteristic. I normally am not so heavy on the slides, but frankly, this subject really lends itself more to a slide than to a demo. So what's going on here? Well, if we look from left to right, we see on the left hand kind of the old original 20 or so years of the Microsoft certification program, where it was very proprietary. You'd never see a reference on a Microsoft exam to Linux, for instance, or Oracle database or anything like that. Product-based rather than job role-based. And then you've got those paper certificates. It looks like I messed these up somehow, because you see the trends. I don't need to read them all, but nowadays Microsoft is much more standards-based, much more collaborative with competitors and that. Microsoft Worldwide Learning is the group at Microsoft that makes these certs, and they conduct what are called job task analyses, or JTAs. And they did a whole bunch of these initially, and they still continue to refine and new job roles emerge. These JTAs are an effort for Microsoft to figure out, how are people actually using our products and technologies? What are the actual job roles that people do? If you're going to be an Azure administrator, for instance, that denotes a certain skill set. If you're going to be a machine learning or AI expert, that denotes another set of skills. So these certs and these related exams all come organically from these JTA sessions that include Microsoft people, including their own cloud solution architects, Microsoft Partner Network volunteers, selected community members from, say, the MVP or MCT communities. So that's what's going on behind the scenes a little bit with these certifications. Okay, let's get into some more tactical suggestions for you. This slide is pretty critical, I think. I need you to understand that Microsoft certifications are aligned in 4 tiers. This 4th tier, specialty, is kind of a one-off, but fundamentals, associate, and expert really are like stair steps or a ramp. In terms of the fundamental certs, most of those exams have a 900 identifier, like AZ 900 is Microsoft Azure Fundamentals, for instance. MS 500 is the Microsoft 365 Fundamentals. The thing about these fundamentals exams is that they're largely non-technical, because Microsoft envisions almost anybody being a good audience for the fundamentals exams. In other words, you could be a sales or marketing person who just happens to work for a cloud consultancy. And in order for this person to know the language, they'll qualify with a fundamentals certificate, you see. So the fundamentals give you the vocabulary, they give you the basic general lay of the land in that technology, that job role. The associate is perhaps the most common certification tier. It's a practitioner level tier, and it really does assume there's not a hard prerequisite, please note that well, on fundamentals, but it's recommended that you're coming into the associate exams with fundamentals equivalent knowledge, okay? So you don't have to have fundamentals, but you better have that equivalency or more of skills coming into the associate tier. Associate is where you get some of the most popular Microsoft certs, like the Azure Administrator Associate. Let's see, the hybrid Windows Server Hybrid Administrator Associate. There's the Security Engineer Associate. The SC certifications, the security and compliance, have been picking up quite a bit of steam lately. All of those are associate. Then we have expert. You notice graphically, we see 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars. Expert assumes that you're coming in with fundamentals and associate level skills. Now, here's where the prerequisites come in. Many of the expert level certifications do indeed have prerequisites. So for instance, if you want to be an Azure solution architect, a certified Azure architect. There's the AZ 305 exam. That's the Azure architect exam itself. But there's also a prerequisite that you have the Azure Administrator Associate Cert. That's the AZ 104 exam. Very important question that I'm asked a lot. When I'm studying for a Microsoft cert that has a prerequisite, do I have to do them in such and so order? And the answer is always no. That is to say, you could do 104 first and then do your 305, or you could do just the opposite. It's totally up to you. But the thing to remember is you don't achieve your expert level badge until you've passed the second of those exams, whichever one it is. Frankly, in this situation, I normally recommend Azure Architect students start with Associate for two important reasons. One, 104 is a very difficult exam, and by clearing that, you're earning a really valuable certification right out of the gate. And I find that that serves as an excellent morale boost to carry you over the finish line for the Solutions Architect Expert badge. Number two, there's the question of overlap. Now, the degree of overlap between these exams is much lower than it used to be because Microsoft Worldwide Learning has intentionally worked over the last couple years in particular to address overlap. Now, there was a time a year or two ago where there would be upwards to 50% or more overlap between, say, the Azure Administrator and the Azure Architecture exams. There's 303. At one time, you had to do 2 architect exams with no prerequisite. Now, the current way it works is that Azure Architect Expert is 1 architecture exam, that's 305, and then there's the 104. So I think that's Microsoft punting, saying well, there's so much overlap between 104 and 303 and 304. Why don't we just redo the architect and then specify 104 as a prerequisite? You see, that's just my supposition. Haven't validated that. Okay, and then lastly, like I said, specialty is a one-off. This is for job roles that don't have multiple, job roles that don't have multiple variants, you know? I mean, for security and compliance, there's a number of roles. There's identity and access administrator. There's security operations analyst, you know, there's a lot. But for something like Cosmos DB development, that's it. So there's a Cosmos DB specialty certification. For supporting SAP HANA database workloads on Azure, that's another specialty. So these are the 4 tiers that we've got. All right, moving on. Let me bring out everything on this slide because it's kind of outdated. Microsoft has, as you probably know, a couple bad habits. One is renaming products and renaming products and renaming products. That's what's happening on this slide. Number 2, there's sometimes some problems with consistency, and that's also a problem here. Initially, Microsoft was much more consistent about how they named their certification exams. Each exam has a 2-letter identifier that at least initially did a good job of telling you at a glance what kind of job role classification you were looking at. AZ for Azure, DP Data Platform, MS for Microsoft 365, SC for security compliance, AI for artificial intelligence, and so on down the line. That is still pretty accurate. The problem is the numbering classification. Originally, it was kind of consistent. The 900s were the fundamentals exams, 100s were administrator, 200 developer, and so on, but that's since appears to have gone the way of the dodo, and there doesn't appear to be much consistency in terms of the numbers. But, you know, honestly, it's worlds better than how it used to be before these role-based certifications. Before all of the Microsoft product certs, the exams were 70-something, but there was no rhyme or reason necessarily what that related to. At least here you have some idea just seeing the exam ID. Making sense so far, I hope? Now, what about choosing your first or next certification? I've just created a couple fairly straightforward flowcharts that I'll go over with you briefly here. And this might be another reason why you want to pick up a copy of the slide deck. I mean, this isn't a rocket science kind of flowchart. I think it's pretty commonsensical, but let's take a look. So starting here at the gate here, performing a self-inventory. What does that mean? Well, have you done a self-inventory? No, then do it. If you have, what does that involve? Well, there's some questions. Number one, is a particular certification required of you based on your current employment or where you want to go? If yes, okay, you've identified it, go ahead and begin your study. You're done. If no, then you might want to, again, think about what you're best at, where your professional passions lie, as you start to investigate what's available in the Microsoft Cert ecosystem. And here, is there a prerequisite for what I'm looking for? Yes or no? If yes, then actually, what am I doing here? I think I might need to refactor this. This seems to have some recursion problems here. So if there's no prerequisite to that CERT program that you're looking for, then you want to think about the vendor, which in our case is Microsoft, the level, as we said, fundamentals, associate, expert, specialty, and then which exam you want to start with from there. So anyway, hope that was somewhat helpful. As far as the next CERT goes, so you're ready for your next certification. Does the CERT require another exam? If yes, you're done. If not, does your business require a CERT? Kind of what we looked at before. And if not, again, it comes back to self-reflection. As you can see, that's a pretty big theme I have as an instructor. Being honest with yourself in terms of not only what do I genuinely enjoy with this stuff, but what am I good at? Or even if I'm not necessarily great at it, let's say you're really attracted to programming, but you've never been really strong in math, let's say. That might be something to investigate to see if you can hone those, build those muscles, as it were, and make up for that initial shortcoming. It's possible, you never know. Okay, so what do we got here? Demo. I'm going to hold this demo for a few more slides. Let's do a little bit more slides and then we'll do a bunch of demo stuff. Developing a certification study strategy. What does this involve? So you've isolated that you're going to go for, say, the Azure administrator. Okay, fine. You like that job role. It's what you want to do. You've realized that there's one certification exam involved. So you figured, okay, do you want to do Azure fundamentals? No, because I do have some experience in Azure. So far, so good. So far, so good. What I use as a metaphor or kind of a guiding principle here for CERT study, I use the London Tower Bridge as my example, is we've got three interdependent skills that I think are all equally important. I really do. I used to use the metaphor of the three-legged stool. And the idea there, it really brings it home. If you remove any of the one legs, the stool is worthless, isn't it? And I've seen, unfortunately, quite a few people over the years go into their certification exam with one or two of these, having been, really focused on them, but neglected the third and not passed the exam and not had a good day. So we've got conceptual understanding, the theory. I would say, non-ironically, Microsoft Docs should be your source of authority for Microsoft Azure. Books, I do books. I sometimes contribute to books and stuff, but books in the cloud platform, print books anyway, do not a happy studier make. This stuff just moves too quickly, in my opinion. Azure moves too quickly, and then once you print a book, whatever is printed on the page is stuck forever. So whatever. So where are you getting your theory? This also could bring in training courses, live, online, pre-recorded, computer-based training. Again, what methodologies are best for you? Reading, depend on your self-inventory and figuring out your best learning style. Now, what about hands-on practical skills? There's a related question here, and that is, do Microsoft exams include performance-based testing or lab items where you're actually doing work? The answer to that question is initially, no, then yes, then no for a long time, and then very recently, as of weeks ago, yes again. So for certifications like the Azure Administrator that are focused principally on application, on implementation, you may very well have one or two performance-based labs, and they, like any Microsoft exam, require preparation and strategy. And that's where the third leg of the stool comes in, practice exam review, which is going to give you the ability to synthesize your conceptual understanding and your hands-on skills in a way that's germane to the actual exam, because computer-based testing may be old hat to you or it may be brand new. It's a different paradigm. How is Microsoft going to evaluate my skills? Well, a good quality practice exam will show you and teach you how to get into that frame of mind to answer these questions accurately. And I would also submit that the practice exam, if it's a good one that includes things like interactive items and case studies, it can give you great confidence that you're not going to be blindsided when you're on exam day and you're sitting there futzing around trying to figure out navigating the exam interface, when in my opinion, you should be focusing 100% of your effort on reading and understanding the questions and answering them correctly. So I'll have more to say on that going on. So I think that I'd mentioned balancing passion and aptitude. Another way to identify your best Microsoft cert and job role would be thinking about what's genuinely interesting to you, what are you good at, and your availability for diving into it. You know, I would always discourage somebody from going into cloud computing unless they didn't have at least a moderate, genuine interest in it. Because I mean, come on, you know, if you've worked in cloud computing, as I said earlier, you have to be in an eternal learner orientation to survive, because the ground is shifting all the time. Can't imagine personally. There's a few jobs I can't imagine ever doing. One would be sales. Two would be compliance, doing stuff with compliance, regulatory and industry compliance. And third would be any work where I didn't have a genuine interest in it, you know? So anyway, take that or leave that as you would. Don't need to read all of this. I just have some supplemental info here. This again is thinking of how you best learn. Do you need a live instructor, and do you really need that back and forth, or are you good working on your own? Are you good with theory, just reading and synthesizing, or do you need to put the skills into practice to see and have them really light up in 3 dimensions? All that kind of stuff. Okay, whoops. Yeah, here I want to call out not the docs, but the exam details page. Let me jump over to my browser here, and let me show you some key web pages that you always want to keep top in mind here. One of these here is in the Microsoft Docs. If you go to docs.microsoft.com, or if you go to Microsoft Learn, the short link for that is microsoft.com/learn. Up on the top navigation, if you go to certifications, browse certifications, or frankly, if you just do a Google search for browse all Microsoft certifications, this is a particularly useful page because it has everything in one spot. And as you can see, there's nearly 300 entries. So it's going to be your first order of business to reduce your signal to noise ratio. And here's a good tip for that. Watch this. If we use the search facets over on the left, I would recommend that you come down first of all and get rid of the exam noise and just look at certs. And next, forget about MCSE and all that garbage. I would suggest that you consider looking at roles, job roles. So you might be interested in Azure Administrator, you might be interested in network engineering, and just filter the list down there. Now it looks like, yeah, okay, yeah, okay. So here's where we're seeing some certifications: identity and access, blah, 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 Azure fundamentals. So you can browse through these. I'm looking for the Azure, the AZ-104. Well, whatever, let's just check this one out, AZ-700, the Azure Network Engineer Associate. Once you come down to the cert page, I strongly recommend, if you haven't already done so, bookmark this, because this is your source of authority for your certification. And notice that Microsoft Worldwide Learning will always put at the top of these pages when the last update was, or when the next, if a new update is going to be upcoming. That's important because depending upon your time horizon for studying and sitting for the exam, you definitely don't want to be surprised with changes going in there. So pay attention to that. In this case, we can review what's required to earn the credential. Here, it's just one exam. So this is another page that you need to bookmark, in my opinion. This is going to walk you through scheduling the exam with Pearson VUE. And then very importantly, we have the skills measured, which you can bring out as a PDF. And this is the canonical list of skills that this job role is covering. And once again, there's going to be some red that tells you when the last update was. And then you can see a delta. You'll see the current version of the blueprint. And then if we scroll past there, there'll be an indication. Here we go. The exam guide below shows the changes. And that way you can see using, the revision tracking marks the last time, or if they're upcoming changes, you can see those here and prepare for it. Now, I haven't done it in a while, but something I recommend students do, particularly those who are on the newer side to this, is copy out this list, from the top level headings all the way down to the skills, and create a spreadsheet out of it. Seriously. So you could go open up, say, an Excel sheet or a Google Sheets or whatever, and create a spreadsheet out of the outline. This is going to give you some assurance and confidence that you're not missing a single skill. Okay. So what I would do is the first column, I would put the top level heading. Second column, I would do the second level heading. Third column, I would have each bullet list. And you know what I normally do is if Microsoft does a compound list, like sometimes, trying to find an example here. Yeah, like this is a good example. That isn't so useful just all chunked together. I'll put each of those on a separate row. Again, the idea is this is going to be what shows up on the exam. It's not like you're going to get one question on each and every skill, because these exams are typically between 40 something and 50 something items, but it'll show up somewhere. It could be just a mention in the stem of a question. It could be a bullet point in a case study. So you really do want to look right down to the individual skill level as you're going about. And by having that cert study spreadsheet with each of the skills on a separate row, you can literally just have the confidence of kind of checking them off as you're studying for them. You'll find that several Microsoft community members on their blogs will publish what they call study guides. I can quickly bring up an example. Let's just do a quick search. Exam, how about SC 300 study guide, and see if a community member, here we go, right off the top. And
Hey,
what
Tim,
these
Tim,
community
excuse me.
members will do is
Tim?
they'll take that objective domain blueprint. Bill, I think we've got an unmuted participant, by the way.
No, that was me trying to get a hold of you. We have a question in the chat.
Oh, sure. Yeah, then let me pause what I'm doing right now and answer the question. Go for it, please.
Okay, I have a query for professional reasons. I would like to develop skills on Azure monitoring products. Which certification should I aim for? So you're interested in Azure Monitor.
Off the top of my head, the Azure exam that has the most emphasis on Azure Monitor would probably be the AZ305 Architect exam. Running behind it, but it is through a security filter, the SC200 exam also covers monitoring and the Custo query language a lot. In fact, SC200 has so much Custo on it, I would dare say if you don't go into that exam with intermediate or higher KQL query skills, you probably won't pass. But I would say look at AZ305 and study guides for that for the most coverage of Azure Monitor. So anyway, these study guides, as you can see, can save you some work, because what these community members do is they look for docs articles that match every bullet point on the objective domain. So that's just something for you to consider. Lastly, back on the exam page, this is something that took me way too long to discover. And now that I've discovered it, I use it all the time. If you scroll to the bottom of the exam page, there'll be a filtered list of learning paths from Microsoft Learn. Looks like here there's just a single AZ700 learning path that consists of 8 modules. Microsoft Learn is non-optional for any Microsoft certification candidate. Why is that? A couple reasons. These are free learning labs that Microsoft makes available. And as you can see, they're catered not only to certifications, but also to job roles. Again, the short link that I use is microsoft.com/learn. Sign in with the Microsoft account that you use for your certification. That's actually really important. If you have a different ID for your exam registrations and Microsoft Learn, you'll actually be forced eventually to merge them or map them together. And this is because you need Microsoft Learn and you need to have that connection with your cert profile. So Renewal will function. And I'll talk more about Renewal in just a couple minutes, but a couple things about Microsoft Learn that are important here. Some of these labs have a live sandbox environment. Remember the Tower Bridge that I was talking about? This is going to give you conceptual help, but also when you hit a lab that has a sandbox, that's going to give you real Azure experience. It's not a simulation. So for instance, I always pick on this one lab on creating a Windows virtual machine because I know it has a sandbox in it. So let's see here, exercise, create a Windows virtual machine. And so what you're doing in this case is that you're signing into the Azure portal on Microsoft subscription. So you don't need a subscription. You just would have your Microsoft account and you'd sign in with that. And it gives you time limited. The labs can go from like 30 minutes to an hour and a half, depending upon how long the exercise is. So you get an appreciable amount of time in Azure. Now, one warning about that, although Microsoft uses things like Azure policy and role-based access control to protect the sandbox, you may find that although this sandbox has you creating a Windows virtual machine, you might find it lets you create a Linux one. Be careful with going too far afield of the labs because Microsoft might consider that it could be detected as anomalous in an abuse situation, and you don't want to get banned by Microsoft from using their sandbox. In my opinion, it's much too valuable of a resource, okay? So Microsoft Learn, as I said, has these learning paths. And if you go up to the very top here under roles, look here. The paths are, in addition to being aligned to certifications, they're also aligned specifically to job roles as well. So again, I can't speak highly enough about this Microsoft Learn site. I do want to, since we're already here, I might as well address recertification or renewal. How does that work anyway? Let's say the example I gave earlier, you decide that you're going to become an Azure Administrator Associate. So you sit for AZ 104 and you pass. Awesome. What's the passing score on these exams, you might wonder? It's almost always 700 on a 1000 scale, but Microsoft is always strong to give a caveat that that does not mean 70%. It's not a straight 70%. This is because your exam is likely to have non-graded beta items in it. It might turn out that Microsoft grades the item for you and then decides, so there's lots of stuff that could happen there. What I would encourage you to do is just be happy you passed. Seriously, in 20-something years, I've been taking these certs the whole 20-something years I've been in the industry. The only people who've ever asked me, what was your score, was fellow trainers looking to do ego flexing nonsense. I've never once been asked for my score from a client, from a prospective or current employer, even a colleague. In my humble opinion, a 700 and a 1000 are equivalent. It's a pass. So anyway, let me get off my high horse here. So that's the passing score. Well, let's say that that happens tonight. You pass your Azure Associate exam. Well, from that day, you've got 365 days of cert validity. The Associate, Expert, and Specialty exams have a 1-year validity period. The Fundamentals exams, fortunately, have a lifetime validity. But you may not be interested in the fundamentals. Maybe you're doing an associate. So what does this technically mean? 1 year? Does that mean if I don't renew, I have to do the work all over again? What exactly does this mean? As an example, let me grab one of my associate level certs here. This is going to show you the public page from Credly, as you can see. See, the badge was issued to me on this date. And in this case, it's a little confusing because up until I think sometime last year, the certs had a longer validity period. It was 2-3 years. Now they're all 1. Okay, so now if you get certified as an Azure administrator or Azure developer, it's going to be 1 year, and you'll see that expiry. Now, if you don't renew, what happens exactly? You still have your badge. You still will have the achievement on your Microsoft transcript. It's just that on the transcript, instead of being up in the front as an active, it'll be in the back under certification history. And honestly, I don't know how Credly displays the badge. If it just says this badge is expired, I think that's all it does. So I want you to know all is not lost if you do happen not to renew. I would submit, though, that renewal is so easy, and I use easy in a qualified way, that it would really behoove you to do it as soon as you possibly can. Here's my tip for you. Check this out. So you get certified today, you know you've got 365 days of validity. When you reach about 6 months, when you have 180 days left of your cert, you'll start to get email invitations from Microsoft Learn saying, hey, you qualify to renew your certification. Guess what? The renewal assessment is a free open book online assessment that consists of normally between 20 and 25 multiple choice questions. Yes, open book. It's really nothing more than a way to force you into the docs a little bit if you weren't already in the docs, and to force you to do your continuing education. It's good. I'm glad for it. So you'll find that the renewal assessments are nowhere near as difficult as the actual exam is.
Tim, we have a couple of questions in the chat.
Sure.
Okay, I'll read it. I'm not sure I understand the first one. It says, great questions, AZ500 and MS500, SC-XXX, same or different?
Okay, well, I don't want to repeat what I've already covered. I would suggest be on the lookout for our YouTube link. I cover the exam naming and what all that means earlier in this session. Is there another question, Bill?
Is it still required for MCT trainers to score over 900?
Oh, you know, was there ever a requirement for that? If there was, it was a long, long time ago. I've been in MCT for 25 years, I think. Whoa, I'm old. No, there's no requirement. Really, an MCT, a Microsoft certified trainer, what it is, this sounds a little cynical, but it's just basically a license that authorizes you to teach Microsoft official curriculum courseware. And especially in the pandemic, Microsoft has dramatically reduced what's required. It used to cost a fair amount of money to have the MCT, and you had to prove your instructional competency. And the main thing, though, is that you need to have the certification for the Microsoft official curricula that you're teaching. No, there's no requirement. If you get a 700 or a 1000, they're equivalent. Okay, let me finish my thought here about renewal. Like I said, when you've got 180 days left, you're invited to go to MS Learn. It's a free open book assessment that normally takes me about 30 minutes. Most of it is just quickly checking the docs to make sure that what I'm thinking the correct answer is the correct answer. Now, when you pass that renewal assessment, you're extended for another 365 days, but listen closely. It's not from the day that you do the assessment. It's from your original expiration date. This means if you take my advice and you renew as early as you possibly can, you're going to have the 6 months left of your original year plus another whole year. Nice, huh? So that in a nutshell is how renewal or recertification works. Now, if you do happen to forget to renew, do you have to start over? Yes, you do. That means you have to retake the current version of whatever exam it is that's part of that certification. Now, if you already have a prerequisite, then you're in a better position. For example, remember what I said about Azure Architect? You have to do 305 and you have to do 104. Well, what if you let one expire and the other one doesn't expire for another couple months? Well, you don't have to worry about the one that's still active. You just are going to have to retake the 305 in this example. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, any other slides here? Let's see. PowerShell, yeah, let me just bring this out in the interest of time. I see that it's 5 minutes of 7, my local time. What I want to sum up here is that you're not going to be writing code on any of the Microsoft exams. Even the Microsoft Azure developer doesn't have you actually composing anything. Instead, what you'll see is existing code. Primarily on the core Azure exams like administrator, security, DevOps, you're going to see Azure PowerShell. You're going to see a bit of Azure CLI or command line interface. For monitoring, you may see some Custo query language. For the data science and the data engineer exams, you may see some Python, surprisingly. Yeah, you may indeed see some Python code. And what you'll do, Microsoft has a couple ways to validate that you know how to interpret that code. This is a screenshot from MeasureUp. MeasureUp is the practice test vendor that I recommend above all the others. The reasons is, number one, it's Microsoft's official provider, and they've been that way for a long time, 20-something years. Number two is that MeasureUp has the different interactive item types that you'll see on the live exam. So this example, this isn't exactly what you'd see on the exam. More what the exam would show you is that you'd see, for instance, a JSON template or a PowerShell script, and there'll be drop-down list box controls embedded in the code. And your task is to go through and open each of those controls, and there'll be 4 or 5 options in each one. So you're demonstrating that you understand the flow or what the code is doing. So another way that they'll do it is they'll show you some code, and they'll have a series of yes, no questions. This is like a statement analysis situation. There'll be some conclusion, and you have to either agree or disagree. You see, they're just different ways for Microsoft to evaluate that you know your stuff in whatever the job role is. Case studies are pretty common across many of the Azure exams. They don't necessarily need to scare you. I've got a good recipe for conquering these. A case study is a test inside of your test. You're going to have a single countdown timer on your cert exams. So you're going along on the main trunk line of the exam, answering questions. And if you come across a case, you're going to have to do it right there. You can't skip it. And once you exit the case, you can't go back to it. So you want to maximize your time efficiency. Case studies normally don't involve too much verbiage. Now, it used to be back in the day that case studies were ridiculously long. It was way too much textual analysis. Nowadays, you'll find that these tabs that you can navigate to just will have some bullet list items. So here's my specific guidance. When you come across a case, don't read it verbatim, word for word. Instead, skim it quickly and look for keywords in those bullet points. You think about existing environment, problems, future goals, blah, blah, blah. Okay, they're mentioning VPNs, they're mentioning file services. Think of those little keywords, because then within the case study, there'll be maybe 5 or 6 items that are related specifically to the case. And what all of those will be is essentially just one sentence. You need to solve the VPN problem. What do you do? And it's going to tie you back where you can come from the question back to the case. I remember they mentioned VPNs on problem statements. And so you go to that page, look through the bullets, VPN, and that's your clue. Ignore everything else in the case. That's your clue that's going to give you the clue that you need to answer the question correctly. So it's a mapping process. And again, these practice tests, these measure-ups in particular, have case studies so that you can develop some of that muscle memory, mental muscle memory, such that when you're on exam day, it doesn't freak you out or freak you out so much. Now, the performance-based labs, this is the clearest picture I could find, and it's not a stolen image. It comes from a public Microsoft slide deck. It was blurry in their deck. Is like a case study where you're on the main line of the exam, and if you come to a lab, you have to do it then. You can't skip it, and when you leave it, you can't come back to it. Now, these aren't on all tests. They're mainly on the ones that you're doing implementation, like administration. And what they involve is, you see on the left part of your screen an RDP, a remote desktop protocol session, and you're given credentials. It's really blurry, but it says username, password. And you sign into the Azure portal. Of course, you don't want to sign in with your own creds. You want to use those creds because those are mapped to your exam session. And then you'll have a task list over here in this anchored palette. It's not floating. There's normally 7 to 9 of these. And there's a little checkbox control where you can keep track of which ones you've completed. These tasks normally would take maybe 15 to 30 seconds each, maybe. they're not meant to be long running. Basically, if you know what you're doing, the idea is you can just jet and do it. You need to, in task one, it might say, you need to configure the storage one storage account for the cool as the default access tier. And if you know how to set tiering for the blob service of a storage account, you can race right to the storage account, click a few times, and go on to the next task. None of the tasks are interdependent, which means if you get stuck on one, just keep on trucking, because none of them have any dependencies. Microsoft Learning confirmed to me directly that they don't care how you do the work. You could click through the portal, or you can open Cloud Shell, and you can use Azure PowerShell or Azure CLI. What happens is that Microsoft collects the JSON of any work that you do and evaluates that to give you a grade on your performance-based lab. All right. Now, when you're finished, you click out and you're done and you go about your business. Now, these were around for a while, a couple years ago. Then Microsoft had a security issue in their subscription, their testing subscription. Some people broke in and were mining Bitcoin. What else are you going to do in a hijacked cloud compute environment? And so they shut it down unceremoniously for a couple years anyway, but now it's starting back up. But the caveat there, and again, I got this info from Microsoft, is that it's very limited at this point. I think, don't quote me, this is speculation, but I think you're only likely to see performance-based items if you're going to a testing center to take your exam as opposed to taking it remotely. If I don't need another reason to continue with remote testing. I'm strictly a remote tester now. But take that for what it's worth. There was another element to that too. One was that it's not for every testing situation. You have to be at a testing center, and it's also not by any means in all exams. And even at that point, there may be different variants of the same exam, where in the testing center, two people are taking AZ 104, one gets performance-based labs, the other one doesn't. So there's no real rhyme or reason. But what I've been doing in my training courses lately is making sure to just give a heads up, teach you how to approach these. That way, if you do see them, you're equipped, and if not, you can heave a sigh of relief and just don't worry about it, okay? Well, there's more to this, but I see we're already a little bit past 7. Let me jump out of the slide view and just take a global picture and walk you through the rest of the deck. What else do I have in there? I've got some screenshots that show the renewal process. I've got a screenshot of your score report. Once you earn your first Microsoft credential, you'll be given access to a private site where it's called your certification dashboard. And this is where you can get your badges and share them. It's just where you can share your transcript. And also what I like a whole lot is that it provides a convenient way to enter scheduled exams. So when I'm getting ready to take an exam, I will have my dashboard up on my laptop, and that way I can just enter the exam directly from here. Speaking of which, there's a lot of guidance I can give you about remote testing if you're going to do that as opposed to going to a Pearson VUE testing center. Let me just finish with this. Some Cliff's Notes guidance if you're going to do online testing. Number one, the most important guidance is to make sure you do a practice check-in. When you register for the exam, there'll be a link to test your computer to make sure that it meets all the requirements. You probably aren't in a position to do the testing then, but you'll want to make sure to do it before exam day to minimize realizing when it's almost too late that you're not in the right room for taking an online test, So definitely do the practice check-in on the computer that you plan to use for testing and in the room you plan to use for testing. Now, honestly, if I were to do this slide over again, I wouldn't use an office because I take all my exams in one of our bathrooms, guest bathroom here at home. I really do. I choose the smallest bathroom in our home. I put a pillow on the toilet seat, so it's at least as comfortable as it can be. I sit backwards facing the tank. I place my laptop on the tank. There you go. Why? Because I don't want to be horsing around with the proctor saying, move this out of the way, this needs to be turned off, move that. Ain't nobody got time for that. So if I would suggest that a bathroom, or if not a bathroom, a closet, if you do need to be in an office, what I would recommend is using a laptop and a tray table so you can just go against a far wall. I would always advise against trying to take your exam from your actual work desk, especially with webcams and multiple monitors. The proctor is going to ding you all over the place, and it can be very disruptive if you're not ready for it. Your room needs to be enclosed with a closed door. You can't get interrupted during the exam, or they may very well revoke your exam session. There's not going to be any bathroom breaks, so make sure to take care of that. You'll want your smartphone as well as your valid ID. You can get all that info from Pearson VUE. Because you've already gone through a practice check-in, you know how to do it, right? So there's that. And last thing I'll say is that one of the check-in steps is that you use your smartphone to take photos of your environment. You take one of your workstation, one behind you, one to the left, and one to the right. I've gotten much better results when I get a wider angle shot. In other words, I'll literally step back a couple paces from my desk to try to incorporate as much of the surroundings as possible. And I've had good luck in terms of proctors not even stopping me, just letting me, releasing the exam right off the bat. But it's always, in a sense, a crapshoot. It's going to depend on the proctor. Some, frankly, are simply more rigorous than others. It's as simple as that. Lastly, when you're actually taking your test, this can be awkward, but you want to be sure you have to be in the webcam frame. You'll see a little thumbnail in the corner, and the proctor will likely warn you if you're doing something like this, resting your chin on your hand. When you think about it, it makes sense. It's about preserving the integrity and security of the cert exam. So you don't want your hands near your face. You want to keep in the frame looking at your screen. If you're looking around like this, that again possibly could be a mechanism for cheating. So you want to, it can be awkward because you're kind of like a robot like this, but I don't mind it because I'm a cyborg. No, I'm not a cyborg. Never mind. Let me see. I think that's about it. Look, I'm conscious and respectful of your time. I don't want to go too far afield, too far over time here. So let me just go to the end of the deck where I can repeat. Let's see, what is our main theme? Yeah, walking away from the session, I just cannot emphasize enough how important it is to do an honest self-appraisal to determine where you're going with your career and your certification, unless you're being forced to. Session materials, again, are at timw.info/CSS22. That'll be a direct download link to the PDF version of this slide deck. And if you want, we can stay in touch on Twitter. Tech Trainer Tim is my Twitter handle, and I like to post on Microsoft certification pretty regularly. Thank you for having me. Thanks, Bill.
That's a great presentation. We've got a few things in the chat. Questions, comments? Can you see the chat?
Let me see here. No, I don't have it handy. Zoom is doing a weird view thing. Okay. Could you recite them?
Sure. We had a question, which I think the answer is yes, about is there a time limit to complete the 20 questions for renewal? I'm sure there.
Great question. No, there isn't.
No?
I've thought of testing that, of starting a renewal and walking away for a few hours. I might actually try that because I do have an assessment I plan to do, but no time limit. You can start it at 2 in the morning or at 2 in the afternoon and take your time.
Okay, well, I'm guessing the answer to the second question is, does renewal of an expert cert also renew the associate cert that was a prerequisite? I'm guessing no.
That's correct. It renews the cert, but not the individual exams. No. Okay. So in the case of architect, you earn your architect on June 1st, but you already had your administrator for a few months. No, your administrator will expire if you don't take care of it.
And the comments that I enjoyed the comment, it's they'll let you cover your monitor with a blanket.
Yeah, I do that actually. I do throw a blanket over in my office when I take an exam. I set up my tray table and I'll throw a blanket over my monitors. I don't want to deal with it. I've got work on there, for heaven's sake.
I have bookcases in my office. I could cover it with a blanket, I guess.
Well, what's weird is that I too have bookcases in my office. In fact, I've got a full bookcase less than 3 feet from where I set up my laptop. And a proctor's never once said anything about it at all. I mean, I don't know if how many computer or tech books are on the bookshelf, if that makes a difference. You know, oh, he's got A Wrinkle in Time on the shelf. He's good. I don't know, but I haven't been troubled by that for whatever reason.
Okay, great. Those are all the questions in the chat. And again, Tim, thanks a lot for a great presentation. I learned more here than I think I've ever learned about a presentation, in a presentation on certification.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Bill. I'm attempting to, okay, there you go. Zoom wasn't letting me stop the share. There we go. Yeah, thanks everybody. Always a pleasure as usual.